Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 46.
46 is a very important number for food, Ben.
For food?
For food.
Why?
And I'm going to tell you, historically speaking. So here we go. In 1946, the first microwave oven was sold.
Okay.
Did you know that?
Some
Microwave
people
ovens
think that
revolutionized
was
cooking.
a bad day for food, but go on.
But that makes food more accessible to bachelors. I'm sure there are many men that are alive today
You're
because
reminding
of
me of
microwaves.
that pitiful looking like 1980s cookbook that says microwave cooking for one. Yeah.
I have that cookbook. When I left home for my first duty assignment, I got two cookbooks. One was like microwave cooking. The other one was a man, a can, and a plan. And that was how to make a dinner for one with canned foods.
That's real? I'm totally looking that up.
I'll show it to you. I'll give you a picture for the show notes.
Okay.
Anyway, Percy Spencer came back from World War II and invented the microwave after working on radar technology the
And
whole
realized
time,
the chocolate bar in his pocket melted?
amongst other things probably.
Yeah.
He called it originally the radar range.
Yeah, I
Like
remember when I was
radar
a kid
and
and
range.
microwaves, everyone didn't know how they worked and they were so suspicious of them. It was like, stand back.
Oh, people still don't know how they worked. I love the memes on the internet you'll see every once in a while where somebody takes a bunch of aluminum foil, crush it into a ball, and put it in the microwave, and then hit 2 minutes, and then take it out like a perfectly round sphere
Yeah, to
of
try
metal.
to convince other people to be idiots.
And then you always see the pictures in the comments of people's exploded microwaves
Right.
because they were stupid enough to actually try it.
Yeah, that's horrible.
People don't put metal in the microwave. It's bad for you.
idea.
All right, that was 1946. In 1846, there was a lady, Nancy Johnson, invented the hand crank ice cream freezer.
Okay, that's a
And
good one.
Nothing more is known about her. That is it. All we know is the name, and then she invented the ice cream maker, and that's it. That is the only mark that she left in all of history.
We had one of those as a kid, and it was this double bucket with this sealed basin inside of an outside basin. You put ice around the outside of it and put salt in it, and then just crank it until you had ice cream. And man, I loved when we got that thing out.
That's excellent. And then high school chemistry told you why you put the salt in it afterwards.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, and then back in 1746, all right, this was my favorite. A lady by the name of Eva Ekblad. She's Swedish, so forgive me for pronouncing her name wrong. She reported her discovery on how to make flour and alcohol from potatoes. She reported her instructions and her recipes to the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. And this was a big deal because up until that point, potatoes were just a curiosity. Like aristocrats had them in like greenhouses
What?
or in little tiny patches. Yeah, no, they
They
had
feel like
no
one of the
idea of
great
how.
staples of history. You're saying potatoes weren't widely consumed until the 18th century?
Not in Sweden, they weren't.
Oh,
apparently, according to this Wikipedia article that I read. And after she published her findings on how to make them in potatoes into flour and alcohol, then they exploded. Everybody wanted potatoes because then that freed up all of the actual grains, the wheat, the rye, and the barley, for actual food. And then you can use the potatoes for all the other junk.
That reminds me of a quote from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, where Friar Tuck's sitting around and he's holding some wheat, and he says, "You can take this wheat and you can make bread out of it, but the Lord has intended a higher purpose."
I saw a documentary once that the premise was that alcohol saved or was the foundation of all of human civilization.
Huh.
That the reason that we transitioned from hunters gatherers to agricultural is because we wanted to make more beer.
All right, well, you convinced me 46 is an important number for food.
There you go.
All right, I want to follow up on a couple of things. So last week I'd mentioned something, and I kind of want to do a little mini Ben versus bureaucracy here, and I mentioned that I hadn't gotten my orders yet. Now, you understand what that means, but I don't know if everyone in our office, in our audience knows what that means, so I kind of want to talk about what it means to get your orders.
Can I do the version of orders?
Okay,
I'll do my
do
version.
the
You can
Josh
do your
version
actual
first.
version. All right, the Josh version of orders is the magic piece of paper that actually proves to everybody that you have to talk to that, yes, I am actually moving. I am going to a place I'm supposed to go to, and you are supposed to help me.
Yes, and if you don't have the magic piece of paper, they won't help you.
Yep. And so you're just kind of up a creek waiting for those to come down, eh?
So since the last time we spoke, I went from not having orders to having orders, and then everything shook loose. Now, what people don't understand is that over the course of a military career, you have to move every 3 to 4 years, and whenever it's time for you to move, there's a cycle that comes up where they consider you for your next assignment. They look at something that's developmentally appropriate, where they're trying to move you somewhere that will help prepare you for what's next in your development pyramid, and I pointed that out in the past, where they want everyone to work towards being higher and higher leaders. So they want you to do something that will help broaden your experience as a person and help you understand all the different aspects of what's happening strategically in the military. So the higher up you get, the better of an understanding you have of the big picture. So that's one, developmental appropriate, and the other is just the need. Since people are moving around all the time, there'll become vacancies and they'll need someone to fill it, and if they don't have someone coming to a job, it'll break things. So they look at where they need people and what's developmentally appropriate from you, and almost as an afterthought, they ask you what your preferences are.
Yeah, there's always the running joke in the military. People think we get to fill out the list, and then, you're always going to
It's your dream sheet.
Yeah, you're always going to get something on your list. And the personnel command, they pride themselves on, well, everybody gets in the top, 10 or something?
Yeah.
Well, 10 is a lot. If you ever sit down and start listing off 10 random cities in the United States. Make a list
of your top 10 presidential candidates. It'll get really thin really fast.
Yeah, you've got probably 2 at the top of your head. The rest you're going to have to stretch for.
Yeah. Anyway, we got one that was on our list. I think it was 3rd or 4th on our list. But what happens, the military is a great example of how a bureaucracy can just become out of control. And moving people around all the time is a great example of that. There's possibility for abuse and just plain old screw-ups, like sending someone to the wrong place or sending them and finding out they shouldn't be there, and it all costs a lot of money and it's really disruptive. So they want to make sure that everything goes perfectly. So they have what's called in-processing and out-processing. Right now I'm going through the out-processing process. And in a bureaucracy, you want everything to be process-oriented so that it doesn't require an individual to understand what's going on. They just have to execute the process. They hand you a checklist and say, follow this checklist. Well, the out-processing process has grown to the point where it is utterly ridiculous. My out-processing checklist, I think, has 43 items on it, and maybe 6 of those are nested processes that also have their own list of several dozen items.
Oh, yeah. Those items will be, go to that building and do whatever they tell you, and you'll be there all day.
And the reason that exists is, let's say, for instance, at a base, they issue you, I'm going to give an example that's kind of ridiculous. Let's say they issue you a weapon. You have this 9mm that you need for performing your duties, and then they give you orders and tell you to leave, and you leave the base, and then some point down the line they do an inventory of their guns and say, hey, where's gun number 437A? So-and-so had it. He's not at this base anymore. Well, why did you let him leave without getting the gun back? Now he's gone and we can't get it back. So every single thing like that has a possibility of happening at one point or another has been added onto this list and added onto it and added onto it. And it is utterly ridiculous, the amount of things that are on this list. Everything from your status as a person with administrative rights to the web page of your office, to any physical equipment you might have been issued, the status of your medical records, your little badge that lets you into buildings. Everything has an item on this checklist. I'd say a solid 50% of them don't even apply. And those are the hardest ones to get people to sign off on, because you got to prove to them they don't apply.
Yeah, because it's there, but if they sign it and then it turns out they shouldn't have.
Yes. And that causes backlogs in weird places where there shouldn't be. It should just be a quick common sense check and be for instance, if they let you leave and you haven't finalized your annual appraisals on a subordinate civilian, then it breaks all the personnel processes. But if you don't supervise any subordinate civilians, it should just be a simple, I don't do that, and they sign you off.
But you see, Ben, whenever you say stuff like common sense check, the reason that it exists on your checklist and it is such a bureaucratic process is because that common sense part of it broke and failed way too many times for it to be left up to common sense.
Or once. I'd be surprised if it was very hard to get something added on there. Someone just has to go, hey, I want to be added to the out processing checklist. They ask one person, and it's on there forever for everyone.
You should try that, like as a prank against
If you
the
want to
military.
leave this base, you got to come talk to me.
Yeah, no, seriously. Like before you leave, this should be like your parting joke on the base. Like try to get your office on the out processing checklist for some stupid reason.
Yeah, they're manifold. There's so many reasons. So the reason I said I hadn't gotten my orders yet is because there's this chicken and the egg problem where they want to give you orders to say you're authorized to go, but they don't want to say you're authorized to go until you at least jump through a few initial hoops of things that have been a problem. So one example is, what if I have members of my family that have medical conditions that can't be treated on the other end of where I'm supposed to be going? If that's the case, then cancel everything. They're not sending me in the first place. So there's a process for the medical group to review everyone's new assignments and do a full review of their medical records and their current status to make sure that they can be supported at the distant end of where you're supposed to be going. Now, if you're going from like the United States to Poland, that might be a problem. You know, you're on Xanax or something like that, and if you don't take it, you try to kill yourself. And they send you over there, and you get there and find out they don't have it, your medication run out, and you kill yourself. That's a huge problem for everyone involved. But if I'm going from Illinois to Louisiana, there should be an opportunity for some kind of like opt-out, common sense kind of thing, but no such luck. So
Ben, like you say that like it's not that big a deal, but I went from Virginia to New Mexico, and let me tell you, I had no idea of the disparity of healthcare that I was going to receive at those two places.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The impetus for proving this is on the source end rather than the distant end. They are not an expert on what medical services are available in Clovis, New Mexico or Shreveport, Louisiana.
Yeah, but by the time you get to Clovis, New Mexico, and they have a say in like, oh, we can't treat half of this stuff, it's already too late.
Right, you're here now. So that's the main stopper. Once you pass all of their medical checks, then they'll provide you the orders to say, you and these people that we verified through another process that are actually your legal dependents are authorized to go from here to there. And once you get there, you'll belong to this unit and you'll have this mission. And then that authorizes a whole bunch of other things that are important, like, for instance, all the money that it's going to cost to ship your household goods and your family across the country. And your orders say where that money's coming from. And it's tens of thousands of dollars. I don't know how the military can afford it. Well, I do know how the military can afford to do this. The people that make the decisions about you moving all the time aren't the ones that actually have to pay the bill. I think if they were the same people, it wouldn't happen quite so often.
And you just struck the single distinguishing factor between private industry and government industry is nobody has to sign any of the checks in the government, and so there's no fiscal responsibility associated with it.
Yeah. Anyway, I got my orders. So we're now
Huzzah and hooray.
We're now officially going, and everything shook loose, and now I'm running down this 43 item checklist with nested checklists that have double and triple nested checklists. It's like Inception, but less interesting.
Now, I do remember that when you had the out processing checklist and orders at the same time, you were basically bulletproof as far as your actual job went. It's like, oh, sorry, I'm out processing.
Yeah, that's definitely true. My 2 weeks R&R from returning from Florida are over, and yeah, I'm not doing anything at my actual job. I'm just out processing. That's my full-time job.
And you just get to shrug at everybody because everybody's been there. Everybody's run that 43 list checklist. And so even if they, like, Major Rich, this is an emergency. We need to have you do this right now. Sorry, I got to go out process. Like, oh, yeah, I've been there. We'll figure it
out. Awesome. Now, you produced a new video that's up on our YouTube channel. I want to talk about it for a minute.
I did. I'm actually shocked with myself because I was able to film the video in one day and then edit it the next, and it was actually up and working. And it's almost like what I wanted it to be, and there was very few technical difficulties.
Yeah, it's excellent. I love it.
I think it turned out really well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so you'd written the article that you put up on badatmagic.live that was all of the changes and modifications that you'd made to set up your home office, where you'd rebuilt your computer, built the desk, mounted the monitors, built cubby holes in the wall, got a new office chair, all that stuff. And you wrote a great article about it. But then something happened that kind of doesn't have anything to do with any of that. I remember when you designed the original specifications for your system that you wanted to rebuild, you left one piece undone.
That's where we're going to pick up the story there?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So when I built my computer, like almost presciently, like a month before COVID lockdown happened, and I made the deliberate decision that I was going to get all great spec'd pieces except for the video card. Because I had read online
that's an expensive piece, and you knew speculatively that new stuff was coming.
This new stuff was slated at that time to come out in third or fourth quarter of 2020. And it was going to be like generational increase, like all the rumors saying it was going to be amazing. So I was like, well, why would I spend $400 or $500 on a video card now when something's going to come out in 6 months that's going to blow that $500 out of the water?
Yeah.
So I deliberately bought a cheap video card that was functional. It did all the things it was supposed to do. It didn't run the games at the best frame rates or the highest specs, but it didn't matter. It did what it was supposed to. But then all the new video cards and graphics stuff came out in third and fourth quarter of 2020, like we said. But by that time, everybody was locked down. And we've talked about this before. There was huge demand. There was problems with the supply chain. And even to this day, we are talking in mid-May of 2021, GPUs, like graphics cards, are near impossible to just go to the store and buy. They're gone, sold out everywhere because the demand is still through the roof.
So these are the RTX 3000 series from NVIDIA.
Yes, there's two new generations. There's the 3000 series from NVIDIA, and then also the 6000 series, I believe, from AMD came out.
Yeah.
But NVIDIA is a stronger competitor for video cards.
But they're similar.
They're similar. But when these came out, like for example, you can't get them because everybody's trying to buy them. And so all of these suppliers are trying to find ways that are equitable to distribute these products to people that want them. Because it was getting ridiculous. Like they're being scalped on eBay right now for 3 times their MSRP.
Yeah. So when you have that kind of environment where there's a high demand and a shortage of supply, then the price goes up. But I don't know why the actual suppliers and retailers aren't jacking the price up. So what that does is that creates intermediaries where people will go out, speculate on them, buy up all the inventory, and then resell at a marked up price.
Yes. Retailers and the manufacturers can't get away with that because that's just blatant price gouging. So they're trying to sell it for, now I say that, but they are marked up like $200 or $300. Like if you can buy at retail, for example, I was offered the opportunity to buy at retail, which is what happened. Newegg, which is a big distributor of computer hardware, does this thing to try to distribute equitably called the Newegg Shuffle. Every day at about 10 a.m. Arizona time, they put up a list of random products that are in high demand. New processors, new GPUs, that kind of stuff. And then you pick which ones you want to buy. Like, I want the opportunity to buy these things. And then you cross your fingers and you hope. And then by
this sounds like a Soviet food line.
Essentially, it's a raffle every day.
Wow.
Later in the afternoon, you get an email that says, most of the time, it says, oh, sorry, you weren't selected. Please try again some other time.
My apologies, comrade.
I've been
Come
doing
back
that
tomorrow.
Yeah, basically. I've been doing that every day for about a month. And then maybe it was posting the article about my setup, but 2 days later, I got the emails.
You're trying to get the opportunity to buy a 3000 series NVIDIA video card at regular, reasonable retail price, $400 or $500.
Close to retail price. Because like I said, they are still marking them up by a couple $100. And they're talking about like, oh, well, there's tariffs and things that are going on that are causing us to have to jack up the price or whatever, but forget it. So I got the magical email that said this time, hey, you were selected to buy one of the things that you signed up for.
So when you told me this, I thought you meant you'd won like a customer, like an advertising style raffle where you had been given free product. No, you won a lottery to have the opportunity to pay a marked up price for a product that was also tied to another product.
Yeah, and that's the worst part, is it wasn't just I was paying a marked up price for the thing that I wanted, but they also, this site, Newegg, has been doing this and people are super mad about it. They are bundling low demand items with the high demand items, and they are forcing you, like the terms of the whole thing say, you can buy this stuff as a bundle for this price. You cannot return them individually, and you have to buy both. If you don't, then you don't get either, and we'll just give it to the next person because there's plenty of people in line behind you that are willing to buy both.
But you understand why they're doing this, right?
I absolutely understand why you do this because they can.
I don't agree with you on that.
Well, they're also moving old inventory. They're moving the.
I don't agree on that either.
There's so many retail reasons to make people buy the low demand product with the high demand product.
Okay, there's two groups. There's two groups out there that are causing this problem, other than the fact that there's a supply shortage of whatever the components or the raw materials that go into it that's causing this backlog in the market. But the two main groups are, one, the scalpers, because of just simple economic supply and demand problems, and the other, which is interesting, this is peaking right now, are crypto miners. And for those who don't know, like my mom, there's cryptocurrency has two aspects to it. At least some do, where like Bitcoin. Basically, when they designed Bitcoin, they said, all right, if we're going to create this new currency that's going to be independent and not run by a government, we have to have a way to release new supply of currency into the environment that isn't centrally controlled. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a fixed amount out there that's basically locked down, and we're going to give it a really hard math problem. And when you complete the really hard math problem, then you unlock part of that cryptocurrency and it becomes yours.
That's called crypto mining.
It's called crypto mining. So the thing that it turned out to be is this really hard math problem that they gave, the cryptography associated with this cryptocurrency that's not yet in circulation, turned out to be the kind of math that graphics cards are best at doing.
Yeah, something about the architecture and just the way that they're built. They are much more efficient in processing and crunching the numbers for crypto mining than like your CPU is.
And then you combine that with the fact that the just cryptocurrency has reached this point in the zeitgeist and the world market where it's just going nuts right now. So the demand for the ability to mine cryptocurrency is really high. So there's cryptocurrency miners that want video cards, and then there's scalpers that want video cards, and the supply is low and it's run the price up. So I found this great article. I may have sent you a link to it that basically talked about why online retailers are doing this. They want to maintain their status as a supplier to consumers, not just to scalpers and crypto miners. So they create lotteries like this where they bundle an appropriate motherboard with a graphics card to try to keep out the cryptocurrency miners and the speculators who are buying and scalping the product. The problem is the opportunity cost is still too high. The amount of money they can make is greater than the amount of the bundled motherboard. So now there's this weird thing happening where crypto miners and speculators have all these extra motherboards sitting around that they got bundled with these video cards that they're buying up and reselling on the secondary market.
Well, and that's where I found myself. Is I get the magic email, hey, you know that thing that you've been wanting to buy for upwards of a year now? Well, guess what? You now have the opportunity to buy it at only a slightly less ridiculous price than you were expecting.
And only if you buy this other thing as well.
Right, but you also have to purchase this motherboard that you don't want. And so I thought about it, and I asked my wife, and she did the thing that she does that all good wives should do, is she recognized that I was going to make the decision regardless of what she said anyway, and so just went with it.
Yeah.
And so I bought it.
Okay.
And this is
now well, I remember you going through this dilemma. You're like, all right, in order to get the video card I wanted, I had to buy another motherboard, but this motherboard's slightly better than the motherboard I've already got in my computer.
Well, and this led me down this rabbit hole. It was like, yeah, I got my graphics card, I can slam it in there and be good to go. And then I was looking at the bundled thing that came with it. I'm like, well, this is an upgraded motherboard. Like, oh, but it's an ATX, so it doesn't fit into my case. Oh, but well, there's this pretty cheap case and then I started I was on the couch watching TV. Okay. I'm like, I could probably get a new case for pretty cheap, and started looking at it. I'm like, oh, but they're too big. And I put my phone back down. Then I thought later,
it won't fit in my cubby I've cut in the wall.
Because they won't fit in the cubby I put in the wall. And then a little bit later I went, well, there are some small cases. And so I went over and I measured the hole in the wall, and I put the dimensions in my phone, and yea, verily, there are a handful of cases that will fit a full-size motherboard that will fit into that cubby.
Wow.
I'm like, and then I'm doing some more research, like, oh, but my processor might not be compatible because my processor is a couple of generations old. And so it was this whole long thing, and it turned out that I had ended up spending another,
hole in the
I think it was
bucket. dear Liza, dear Liza. Josh,
Yeah, it just kept happening.
yeah. So I want our listeners to understand the difference between buying the mother. Okay, when you got the motherboard originally in the PC that you built, you had it already ready to just swap out the old video card and put in the new video card, and everything would be good to go.
Yes.
And what you're describing, this alternate timeline, is an order of magnitude greater than that. Like, you would have just unplugged your computer, taken out the hole in the wall, taken the case off, unplugged a few cables, taken out the old video card, put in the new video card, plugged everything in, put it back in the wall, half hour max.
Yeah, absolutely. Half hour tops from start to finish.
So an order of magnitude would be 300 minutes instead of 30 minutes. Would you say that's about how many this whole project took you?
Oh, no, way more than that.
Okay.
It took from noon, and I was working until like 7 o'clock that night. Because here's the thing, Ben, like everything just kept compounding on itself. It's like, well, I can get this motherboard to work. Oh, and there's probably a 60% chance it'll work with my processor. Well, I'll roll the dice on that one. I can get this case for $50. Let's do some research about that. Oh, well, this case doesn't have the best
Holy
airflow
crap.
in the world. Oh, but I'll tell you what, if I cut some holes in it and then put some extra fans, then I can get some good airflow that I need for the smaller space. Oh, but then they won't be covered. Oh, so I just get a couple of fan grills off of Amazon, and I can mod those onto the front and then put the magnetic covers over them.
It blows my mind that this is that this invigorates you rather than deters you. It deters me.
I was like, all of the stuff came on like Thursday that week, and I was chomping at the bit for 2 full days. I just wanted to tear into it and I want to get my hands dirty.
You kept texting me about it.
I want to do this, and I want to spend all day doing it. And Ben, that's exactly what I did. It's so great. I've got the new little box sitting under my desk right now as we record, and it's just great, and I love it. The only downside, I will say, is this case will not support the new CPU cooler that I was looking at. Yeah, the new CPU cooler I wanted is just slightly.
Why do you want to
large.
overclock it or something? What's wrong with the old CPU cooler? It was an air cooler, right?
Yeah, it is an air cooler, and the new CPU cooler was also going to be an air cooler because they're much more reliable. But my processor, it's an 8-core processor, and it has a lot of temperature spikes. So without doing things to artificially smooth the fan curve, like I'd be sitting playing a game or something, and you could hear the fans whir up and then whir right back down.
Right.
Because they're responding to the temperature of the processor.
There's things you can do in software that smooth that out a bit.
Which is exactly what I ended up doing, and
Okay.
It's fine. But my first reaction was, I need something that's way beefier than what I have.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fit in the new case. We're good. Everything's good for now. There's no new projects on the horizon. Nicole, calm down. Don't come yell at me.
But here's the thing.
Everything's good.
You had that old PC for in the same configuration it was for like a decade. And then there's just been this flurry of upgrades. Are you going to be satisfied with this new one for a decade? Is it just going to be fine for a while?
This computer will be fine for a while, yes. But Ben, here's what you're missing about this. After all of this stuff was done and I had to clean up the mess that I had made, I realized that I had all these PC parts that were left over from this Frankenstein operation. I'm like, oh, well, it would be the most convenient way to package or to store all this stuff is just to put it all together. So I took my old case and I put my old power supply that I replaced as a potential upgrade months and months ago. I put the old power supply into the old case. I put the motherboard that I was using back into that case. And then I put the old graphics card onto the motherboard and then closed everything up. And then I started realizing, this is only like 3 components away from being another computer. So that's like sitting over in the corner in this room right now.
But what do you need another computer for?
I don't, but my son's going to need one at some point. And so I've got it sitting right over there in the corner.
All taken apart so that he can do the assembly?
Oh, no. It's again, for storage, I put it all together because it takes up the least amount of space.
Got it. All right. Well, that'll be a fun project for Carter at some point down the road.
Someday.
Now,
if I just don't do it for him.
This reminds me of one. So Josh made an excellent video about this, and you can watch a time lapse of it. And it's got some cool music, and it's great. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to watch and see Josh build his newest iteration of his computer. This reminded me of something that happened back in the 90s with Beanie Babies and Happy Meal. Do you remember this?
I remember Beanie Babies were supposed to be worth a ton of money, but they were only worth money because people thought they were worth money.
Yeah.
That's all I remember from Beanie Babies.
It's a great example of this that we're having, although this is a legitimate electronic component that has capabilities that you wouldn't otherwise have. But anyway, there was this economy that rose up. But part of the shortage of video cards is surrounding cryptocurrency, which is just speculative. Anyway, the thing about Beanie Babies, and sometimes at other points this has happened with toys at McDonald's, where the toy itself has become more valuable than the totality of a Happy Meal. And so people would want to go into McDonald's and just pay them money just to get the toy because that was the only way you could get it. There was this degree of exclusivity. And McDonald's says, no, we're not doing that. We're not turning it into a toy store. You got to buy the food. So people would go into McDonald's, buy a Happy Meal, take 3 steps, throw all the food in the garbage, and carry away the toy.
I do not recall that.
Yeah, which is kind of what's happening with these motherboards that they're bundling with the video cards. But anyway, maybe I can be a beneficiary of this and go out on the internet and pick up like a bargain basement dirt cheap motherboard right now and then wait for the prices to come down on the video cards.
Well, I'm using my motherboard, so I'm not one of these people throwing the Happy Meal away.
Right. This last week, my 15-year-old son had a choir concert, and it was a very COVID choir concert. So I want to talk about what this kind of thing is like in the era of pandemic panic.
We actually saw a concert the high school put on early in the pandemic days, and it was all done via Zoom, and it was pre-recorded. It was really well done.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. As long as the choir's all in the same room. If you've tried to do anything musical where you're actually dealing with the lag over the internet, you can't. It's impossible to try to synchronize with someone where there's a delay.
Ben, we're having a back and forth conversation, and it's almost impossible to synchronize what we're talking about.
I know. Anyway, we went to the high school, and first of all, they made you pre-register in advance that only 2 people could come, and then they had all the seats marked off, so you had the social distancing, you had to wear the mask. But the real problem is the kids on the stage. It was kind of eerie that they were singing, and you don't realize this, but even something as simple as just being able to see their mouth moving and kind of a little bit of their dancing and stuff, you can almost always pick out individual voices and see who's singing. But when they all have masks on, it's just this muffled noise that's vaguely coming from the direction of the students. And you can't really tell who's singing what or when. And not to mention, it's really kind of dull and subdued. They were wearing black, they all had on masks, and it just sounded like they were talking into their hands. And it was horrible.
Yeah, I think you've talked about this before. You're just at a point where you have so many children and you go to so many child events that you just loathe all of them equally now.
Yeah, this one was really kind of terrible because there was also this stretch back rubber band of they don't get together enough, and the choir teacher talked for longer than the students were performing, giving out like awards and praising them and stuff. It just there's this longing for things to return to normal. So when we get together for an event, then it just gets stretched out and elongated in this weird way that didn't exist before.
It might just be because your tolerance is so much lower now because all of the kids' events have been canceled. You just haven't lived a life having to zone out for hours at a time.
Well, my eldest daughter, who's a senior and hopefully graduating next week, is at prom right now, and she had her mother hem her dress and cut off the fabric at the end of her dress and then use the excess fabric to create a mask so that she could wear a COVID-style face mask that was matching her dress.
Well, how's she going to make out if she's wearing a matching mask?
There will be no snogging.
Oh, come on, Ben. It's senior prom.
Oh, man. Wait, Josh, you're kind of talking close to my heart because my daughter's out right now. Did you watch her rush in, go upstairs, and run back out just a minute ago?
I did see that, yes.
Okay.
She seemed like she was in all a fluster.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Anyway, it's not like she tells me those kinds of things.
That's the best thing you want to hear from a parent. It's like, oh yeah, my daughter's at prom. I don't know what's going on.
What did the Fleshman family do for Mother's Day?
The Fleshman family did very little. The father of the house reminded the children that it was Mother's Day and told the children to go say Happy Mother's Day to
you guys don't do like the breakfast in bed thing or anything like that?
I don't trust my children in the kitchen anyway. I think we've talked about this. The kitchen is not a place for children right now.
Yeah.
But not really, no. I probably I feel like I knocked it out of the park for Mother's Day. Let me just say that. Not because I got a very thoughtful gift, not because I spent the entire day pampering her, which I tried to do, but it ended up being kind of a normal day where I did a little bit of extra chores.
Yeah.
But because I got her what I think is the best gift, and that was I hired a maid service to start coming to our house again regularly.
Okay.
And I figured that's got to be in every top 10 Mother's Day gifts out there.
But there are different people out there. When we were in Italy, there was like illegal immigrants that were looking for work, and you could hire a maid for like dirt cheap as long as you paid them cash under the table and they didn't have to pay taxes on it. And we had one for a while, and my wife hated it. She loathed it. She couldn't wait to cancel it, and only did it to humor me. So it was not for her.
What did she not like about it?
I'm trying to remember all the things. Part of it was that she felt like she had to clean up before this other person came to clean. Like she was
I can't confirm that is a thing. We will, the night before the maids come, we will spend the night tidying and putting everything away and making sure the house is clean-ish so they can actually do the cleaning.
Right, exactly. Focus on the scouring rather than just the picking up clothes off the floor. The other part was almost like this territorial. It probably is similar to something like David Attenborough would have filmed on the Serengeti with a herd of lions. You know, there's this other she lion that's coming into the pride and violating the territory.
Well, that is a difference then between our spouses because Nicole and I are both of the mind that, you know what, if someone else wants to come scrub our toilets and bathrooms, we are all for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I thought it would be. Like, don't you like having clean toilets? No. Well, you weren't doing it before the maid came. Now that the maid comes, we have clean toilets. I'd rather have not clean toilets than have someone else coming into my house and cleaning them.
You call out Alicia so much for stuff on this podcast. Like, I feel so bad whenever you start talking crap like that.
I don't know how you're right. Let's see. I feel like I need to reciprocate, but I can't think of a good way to do it. I just wasn't sensitive to this at all. It was just a violation. It was just a sin on my part.
Well, I spent a half an hour of my morning this morning scrubbing our shower with a scrub brush and bleach spray. What did you do for your wife today, Ben?
All right, let me tell
you.
You
hear that, everyone? Everyone, listen. If you listen real closely, you can hear the cracks
chirping
in Ben's marriage getting whiter.
Well, okay, so let me tell you what we did for Mother's Day. So on like Tuesday of the week before Mother's Day, I get a text from my bishop who runs our local church congregation, and he says, hey, we don't have anyone picked to give the sermon yet this Sunday. Would you be willing to prepare a 12-minute talk for our church service on Sunday? It being Mother's Day, your topic would be how mothers, are the contribute to the world being a better and more righteous place. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. He said, we also need a youth speaker to give a 5-minute talk. Will your 11-year-old be willing to do that? I said, okay. So that week, it was kind of my chore to prepare this 12-minute talk that I was going to give to my church congregation and help my daughter with hers. I sent it to you. Did you take a look at it?
I read it. Yes, I did.
Okay.
It was a very in-depth and well-spoken speech about the nurturing aspect of women in society.
Yeah, it focused on my own personal experience. So I talked about my own mother and then a couple of nice things about my wife. So she was sitting in the congregation while I was telling the whole congregation all the wonderful things that my wife does for raising my children right and taking care of our family, particularly due to the fact that I'm in the military. I sat down and tallied it out, and I have spent, over the past 17 years in the Air Force, I've spent 1 in 7 days away from home. And sometimes in big chunks, like for instance in 2011, when we had 6 kids at home, the ages 1 to 11, 2 in diapers, I was gone for 8 months. So she was at home with 6 children, all under the age of 12. And yeah, that was a lot.
Yeah, she deserves all of the medals that you got for your deployment.
Yes, she deserves to have a maid if she liked that kind of thing, but she doesn't. So I when I got back, part of what I told in that talk was when I got back, I'd been given a medal for my service in Afghanistan, and I got to the airport and I kind of called this impromptu crowd together, and I read off a list of her accomplishments and her contributions to freedom, and then I pinned the medal on her there in the airport, and everyone clapped and cheered.
Which would have mortified my wife to no end. Like, she'd have died on the spot, and or pretended she didn't know who I was and had me arrested.
I don't know this man. Yeah. Anyway, so that was what I did for my wife on Mother's Day. I prepared and gave a public address of praising her for her stalwart contribution to our family as a wonderful mother.
Did it get racy at the end? Did you close with like a bedroom joke?
You said you read it.
I know, but I just wanted you to say no.
My raciest joke was telling the story about my own mother and the fact that I have the dubious honor of being one of 2 men she's ever sworn at in her entire life.
That's whoa, man. Settle down here. This is a Rated G podcast. Yeah. Oh, woo.
Now, so speaking of COVID, there's been a few other casualties that are weird. They just keep coming. Like, it looks like we're on the way out. It's like we've hit the bottom and started digging. Like, things are still getting worse somehow. The dry cleaner on my street closed down, and I hadn't thought of them as a casualty, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized things like people aren't going to events anymore. When we went shopping for prom dresses, it was hard to find one. Like, no one's holding prom, so why should retailers take a loss to stock an item in their stores that no one's going to buy?
That's true. David's Bridal's probably really struggling right now.
Yes. Weddings are smaller and less elaborate, and there's just all these follow-on effects that still haven't finished. So the dry cleaners down the street closed down because no one was using dry cleaning. My favorite barbecue joint across town closed down. Now they rose from the ashes as a roach coach.
Yeah. The profit margins on food trucks are much higher than a traditional brick and mortar restaurant.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if you're aware.
Yeah, don't got to pay for all that retail space.
That's right.
And but just this week I got the CDC release their new guidelines of people who are fully vaccinated don't require masks outdoors and in public other than a few situations. And the DoD released a memorandum, so now I don't got to wear a mask on base anymore because I'm vaccinated, which is nice.
So I'm vaccinated too, and I saw a comic just today that described this perfectly. It was from the perspective of a retail person. And there was somebody walking up to her, and it's like, oh, isn't it nice you don't have to wear a mask if you're vaccinated? And then she asked him, are you vaccinated? And he goes, well, I guess you'll just have to trust me.
Yeah. Oh, I don't want to go into that debate, Josh.
Well, I'm in a very red state, and I am surrounded on all sides, Ben, by anti-maskers.
Right.
And I'm discovering anti-vaxxers. So we're struggling still. Like we're still doing the full, like,
yeah, but unless they're going to require like papers, please, style vaccine passports, you're just going to have people walking around that aren't vaccinated and are anti-maskers and who will pretend that they are vaccinated.
Yeah, which is why I still wear my mask in public and why I still get weird looks from people when I do.
Yeah, and I still wear mine in public just because I like giving the public perception I'm being considerate of others.
I like being able to silently swear at people without them knowing it.
All right, well, there's one other follow-up item I want to say. You sent me an item about something I hadn't heard of before, and that's called the Halcyon Star Cruiser. I want you to talk about this for a minute.
Me? Okay. Well, my sister went to Disney World last week, and while she was there, apparently she saw a part of an attraction and sent me a picture of just a placard and like a model of what is clearly a Star Wars Corvette-style cruiser. And on this placard, it describes apparently an in-depth experience that Disney is designing and going to put out into the world at some point in the future. The idea being that of an immersive, all-inclusive vacation for 2 days and 2 nights, where presumably you will go to this hotel, but the crew and everybody that's there is going to be immersed in this Star Wars-esque story as if you were living on a Star Cruiser, moving from one planet to another, I guess is what my take on it was. And there's going to be some intrigue and some plot lines and some story to follow. and things to do and cast members to interact with. And so it's almost like you're going to get to role play for 2 days and 2 nights in the Star Wars universe. And if that's what it ends up being, that's going to be the best. Because I think I've said the words on this podcast that like any individual Star Wars movie is good, but the Star Wars universe is what we all thrive on. And I just want to wrap myself in the warm fuzzy blanket that is the Star Wars universe and live there. And this sounds like it could be the opportunity to do just that.
So what is it? Is it a cruise ship?
I don't know. I did not do any research. I thought you had.
Okay, well, here's what I have done research on, because this kind of thing existed previously, but it hasn't been done yet in the Star Wars universe. Have you ever heard of secret cinema?
I think I've heard a podcast or two talking about where they'll do like a movie and then you go to a place where they're going to do a filming, but you also have to take on a role while you're there, and they like do a big production as if it's the setting of the movie.
Yes. So to give you an example, some of the past secret cinemas have been like Blade Runner. So they'll take a location and they will create like a film set that looks and feels like the futuristic, cyberpunk future of Blade Runner. And then in advance, you'll have to show up in costume. They'll give you assignments like provide a photo of yourself doing such and such a thing. And you send that to them, and then they take that and integrate it into their universe. And then when you get there, you're like on a quest. They'll say, go over and talk to so-and-so, and you'll get there and they'll have that picture of you or something like that. And you're interacting. And then the highlight of the thing is that you watch a screening of the movie in question where you've been interacting all along with things that tie into it. So past ones have been, Alien, The Shawshank Redemption, Casablanca. Oh, there was one for Star Wars. Blade Runner, Casino Royale, Stranger Things. So those are all ones where you just come, like if you did a Stranger Things one, it would just be all like 80s themed and 80s world and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, it sounds like this Halcyon Star Cruiser is that, but Star Wars. So that sounds great. Let's do it. How do I sign up?
Right. This is one of those shut up and take my money moments for Disney. And I'll tell you right now, Ben, like you're going to get there. I feel like I'm going to check into this hotel and they're going to give me the lowdown. Like, okay, this is what's going to happen. Here is your minor role that you're going to play in a much larger thing that's going on. I'm going to take that and be like, yeah, no, that's not what this is going to happen. And I'm going to be the next lead. Like, I don't care what the story is. I'm going to be the Imperial trooper that takes over this Star Cruiser because I don't think the Empire was necessarily in the wrong, at least in the original trilogy. So I'm just going to expand my role and just see how far they'll let me push it.
So in the military, there's this training called SERI, Survive, Evade, Resist, Escape, that you have to do if you're going to be some type of aircrew where you're going to be flying over enemy territory where there's the possibility that you could be captured or crash behind enemy lines. And it's notorious in the military for its rigor and thoroughness about learning to live off the land, evade enemies, and even potentially get captured and be interrogated. And anything that you can imagine, probably from movies you've seen, there's some form of that in this training. Did you take SERI training?
At the academy, we had to take a super watered-down college version of it.
Yeah.
And we're supposed, the whole time you're supposed to be pretending that all of this stuff is real. However, in the middle of the night when I was captured and they threw me down onto a cactus and an anthill, I got up and moved, and they're yelling at me. It's like, oh, you stupid American. And then I stood up and I was a foot and a half taller than the guy. I'm like, you threw me down on an anthill. Let's just reset and start from here. How about that? And then I laid back down and we got back to business.
Were you supposed to lay in the anthill?
Yeah, he was like, yeah, what are you moving for? I'm like, because you threw me in an anthill, and I don't care about all this training stuff. Yeah, it's supposed to be real. I'm supposed to be uncomfortable, but those are ants, and I'm not putting up with it.
Yeah. So along those kind of lines, there's this urban myth of some guy that takes it way too serious. I think it may have even been enacted in a movie where there's some wild guy that's just running through the woods the whole time. So you get to SERI training, and what they do is you're surrounded. They got cameras. They're supervising the area. They know everywhere it could go. They throw you out in the middle of nowhere. They have a strict schedule they're sticking to. All right, we're going to let them live out there for 2 days, and then we're going to pick them up and we're going to throw them in jail. Well, imagine you got some guy that's taking it way too hardcore. You drop him off, and he goes off the map. He disappears. They can't find him.
Ghosts it. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, that's what you sounded like you're describing is what you would do in this thing. I'm going to break the game. I know that the schedule says this, but I'm going to do something completely different.
Ben, if at any point during the Halcyon Star Cruiser thing, like if there are stormtroopers that invade, like I'm going to come out as an Imperial double agent as their boss and take over. Like, all right, let's go. We're room by room.
You're the guy that kicks the Wolfman in the junk in the haunted house, aren't you? He's just some poor schlub in a wolf costume, man.
I don't like haunted houses, Ben. Like this is something we've talked about. The reason I get so into stories, the reason I love character development and all these things is I'm just way too vested in these things.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk bad at logic. We missed it last time because we had a perfect opportunity came up to transition into our main segment. But this week, it's my turn. I do the logical fallacies, you do the biases. So our bad at logic card I'm going to do this week is called the fallacy.
I am a victim of the fallacy. Like 100%. I will fall for this every time.
The fallacy is you presume that because a claim has been poorly argued or a fallacy has been made, the claim itself must be wrong.
Yep.
Just because an idiot says it doesn't mean it's wrong. They could be right. Even a stop clock is right twice a day.
I get that, but Ben, like if you make your point badly and if you don't understand like all of the stupid tricks that you're trying to pull to make your point, I feel like that invalidates it. This is why I suffer from the fallacy because I will immediately discredit and completely throw out anybody that commits a logical fallacy.
Yes, you did this to me.
When did I do this to you?
Well, you and I were arguing something about politics, and I sent you a link to a Washington Post opinion piece. You're like, yeah, I'm not reading that. It's an opinion piece. But read this opinion piece that tells my opinion.
I do remember that. And my point was perfectly valid at the time.
I'm just like, it doesn't matter if it's an opinion piece. Let's talk about ideas. Anyway, it's entirely possible to make a claim that is false, yet argue with logical coherency for the claim, just as it is possible to make that is a claim that is true and justify it with various fallacies and poor arguments, which happens all the time.
Yes, just because somebody's arguing their point terribly doesn't mean they don't have a point.
Right.
But I still don't come at me with your unresearched nonsense, people. Like I'm going to discredit you because of the fallacy, and that's all the time you're going to have with me.
All right, Josh wants this one. He's hanging on to it.
This is the problem. This is like
I'm willing
the second
to set
or
it
third
aside.
one. Like this is like the second or third like fallacy or bias where I'm like, no, I don't think this is bad. I like it. I'm going to keep doing it. Like that probably makes me a bad arguer.
I can see why you want to defend against this one. And this actually exists in a lot of areas where we argue. On the floor of Congress, in a courtroom, in a high school debate team. You have rules to follow, and you have to follow the rules. And even if you're making a true point or a valid point, if you're talking after your time is up, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. But this is one of those ones where I feel like in any of those circumstances, in a debate team, on the floors of Congress, you should get 3 strikes, and they should have big 3 red light up X's on the front of the podium.
But that's what I'm saying. They do uphold the fallacy. It doesn't matter if you're right. You have to follow the rules.
No, I don't think they do, because people get up in Congress and talk out their butts all the time and commit all of these fallacies. I think you should get 3.
Sorry, I brought Congress into this. I still think my point is valid.
High school debate teams, you're absolutely right. They keep score, and like the whole point is not to commit fallacies. I think politics, it goes the opposite way. It's like, who can make the best fallacies?
All right, let's talk bad at English. So This one I set aside as fun. I was sitting in a meeting one time, and the British were describing a situation where they wanted something, and it was uncommon in the Ministry of Defense because they were frequently not as well funded as the U.S. Department of Defense, where they wanted something that came with all of the extras associated with it. In America, we might say all the bells and whistles.
Okay.
And they called it all singing, all dancing. But now imagine that, like we said, Josh wants to upgrade his computer, but he wants it all singing, all dancing.
That's interesting because I can't, for the life of me, imagine any British person singing or dancing.
I know. Well, I can, but yes, all singing, all dancing. And the reference is to an American thing. So I looked it up, and it's a reference to a musical that came out in 1929. It was the very first all talking back when movies were making the transition from being silent or with just unattached music played over the top of it to actually being talkies. And it was a musical called The Broadway Melody. It was Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's first all-talking, all-singing, all-dancing picture. And from what I hear, it was a monstrosity. It's a great example of why thinking that something, just because something won an Academy Award, it was good. This was won an Academy Award for Best Picture in 1929, and by all accounts, it's horrific.
It still confounds me that it took the movie industry upwards of 3 decades to figure out that, hey, tap dancing is not the pinnacle of entertainment.
Yeah, it was just a monstrosity. But by modern reviews, if it were on Rotten Tomatoes today, it would be 35% fresh. But the movie posters for it often say all singing, all dancing. So it was to convey this idea that you're getting the deluxe, the full thing that you weren't expecting.
You say that like if I was dragged to a movie and it said on the poster, like I can see myself being dragged bodily into a movie theater and the poster says all singing, all dancing.
Yeah, like I'm out of here.
The only thing I'd be thinking at that point is, oh Lord, what's the runtime?
Yeah, and it was short because they were back then. But yeah, so we might say all the bells and whistles. My friends in the UK would say all singing, all dancing.
Well, this podcast is all singing, all dancing, with no singing and no dancing.
All right. Well, Josh, last week you and I talked about, for our main feature, we talked about the excellent modern film noir Minority Report, and we kind of were scratching around the edges of the ideas of time travel in film. And so you and I have been waiting, and I think it's time for us to do a blowout about time travel in film. So let's dig in.
And now, specifically, let's make this clear. We're not talking about actual, like the physics behind what time travel could be in the real world as we understand how the universe works today. Correct? This is just the fantasy versions of time travel.
Yes. And because of that, I think it would be appropriate for us to continue to use Sanderson's laws of magic to evaluate the time travel systems in question.
I think since time travel is still a fantasy concept, I think that's appropriate.
Are we not in agreement that time travel does not generally exist, nor will it ever?
So some versions of time travel theoretically could exist with like extreme distortions of gravity and or accelerations close to the speed of light, but it's always going to be one direction until we figure out wormholes.
Yeah, I watched a Neil deGrasse Tyson video where he was talking about like going between two black holes or something like that. Okay, yeah, I got it.
Well, it's still cool stuff, and like I wouldn't be a nerd if I didn't like geek out about it. But yes, we're not talking about Einstein-Rosen bridges. We're talking about the DeLorean.
Yeah, well, we've even done it. Like, okay, I'll put a link to this Minute Physics video where they kind of run down time travel in cinema. But there's 3 main types of time travel that they talk about in film, and one is just Einsteinian relativity, which has been proven. Like, there was an experiment where there were 2 highly accurate nuclear clocks, and they flew one around the world, and they were out of sync. Like, yes, and that's just short distance, low speed.
Yes, anything that is traveling at any speed will experience time slower relative to things that are standing still.
Right. So some examples of that in film are like Planet of the Apes, which, spoiler alert, the astronauts go out into space and they come back to Earth and they feel like they came back to the wrong planet because it's being run by monkeys, but actually just time traveled at a different rate, and when they get back, the Earth is the Earth they left, but a whole bunch more time passed for Earth than it did for them.
Oh, Ben, you just spoiled one of the worst movies of all time.
Yeah, don't watch that. Another one is Ender's Game. Orson Scott Card, I guess, decided to delve into Einsteinian relativity a little bit in his depiction of interstellar light speed travel.
There was a movie that came out not too long ago called Gravity that talked about that, where they ricocheted around a black hole and he traveled 50 years into the future and stuff like that.
He also got sucked. The Christopher Nolan movie with Matthew McConaughey.
Yes, that is that movie.
That's not Gravity. It was called.
Oh, you're right. That's not Gravity. Who cares what it's called? At one point, he was following what we understand of physics by he did an orbital maneuver around a black hole
Interstellar.
and lost a bunch of time. There was another, but later in the movie, he then fell into the black hole somehow and didn't die and was able to experience all time everywhere. That was weird.
Yeah. Okay, so in that respect, time travel kind of exists, but we're not going to talk about that. I don't want to talk about any of those kinds of movies. You don't want to talk about any of those kinds of movies. So we're going to talk about the ones that are much more like a magic system. So this is a sci-fi version of magic. It allows you to do things that are magical in nature, that you can change the past or the future, or help you solve problems that are otherwise unsolvable, maybe potentially give you immortality or something like that, or allow for a prophecy of the future that rather than being theological is scientific in nature.
Also lets you go back in time and hit on your mom.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do like we do here on the Bad at Magic podcast, where we evaluate the magic system in question. In this case, we're going to rapid fire through a bunch of our favorite time travel movies and evaluate their use of magic according to Sanderson's laws of magic. There's 4-ish laws. The first is that an author's ability to solve a conflict with magic is directly I'm going to change these words to time travel. An author's ability to solve a conflict with time travel is directly proportional to how well the viewer understands time travel.
Yes.
The second law, the limitations of time travel are more interesting than its capabilities. I highly agree with that in these cases. And 3, expand on what you already have about time travel before you add something new. But the 0th law of Sanderson's laws of magic is always err on the side of that which is awesome.
Which is why Back to the Future 3 exists in the first place.
So in this case, as we're looking at these, let's talk about how the time travel system in question works. Do they follow the laws with it, like teach it to us, have limitations, and stay within the laws that they've shown us? And then is it logically consistent with the logic that they're presenting to us? And is it awesome?
Okay. That sounds like a fun time.
So you go first.
Okay. So our homework, the homework you gave me, was we need to come up with our 3 favorite adaptations of time travel. So the first one, I've got to go with the classic, the Back to the Future trilogy. Such a great storyline.
You're doing the whole trilogy or just the first movie?
Well, I want to, in general, Back to the Future in general, they were all shot basically together. How can I not treat them all separate?
They weren't, though.
They weren't. Like, we're not. Do we have to talk about all 3 movies? Like, we don't have to.
Okay, I rewatched the first one this week, and I was astounded at how tight of a piece of filmmaking it is. It's just so. It just cooks the whole time. Every time the plot starts to drag a little bit, it just moves along, and it follows Sanderson's laws like no other thing I can think of.
Absolutely. And this is so. Here's the thing: is I don't want to talk about all 3 movies. I can sum up the entire third movie with just they wanted to go to the Old West and make it awesome. And it was. And everybody loved
awesome.
It.
Yeah.
Yes. So I want to talk about the entire first movie, and then just the chunk of the second movie where they had to go back to where they were in the first movie and overlapping like multiple times in this past era.
That's fair.
So the idea of this time travel was that our genius, who is inexplicably friends with a teenager, Doc Brown, struck it like he was mounting a clock.
Again, listeners.
This will come up again. He was mounting a clock in his bathroom, slipped and hit his head, and when he woke up, he drew this picture of the flux capacitor, which, funny thing, I went to electromagnetics class in college, Physics 202, and they explained how flux can't be capacited. But that's a whole different thing.
That is awesome. Yeah, okay, there's definitely some techno babble here, and I hadn't really considered the aspect of why did falling and hitting his head help him make a breakthrough in science? Is there supposed to be a supernatural element here?
No, but that was one of the key things that the future Marty came back to 1955 and like justified his presence there. It's like you felt like he explained that whole scenario to Doc Brown.
Yeah, we all remember.
And that was genius because then it skipped that whole part of having to prove himself that yes, yea, verily, he is a real person from the future.
All right.
Anyway, so the magic system there.
First ingredient is having the flux capacitor. What else? There's 2 other rules.
So the rules were that you can't change anything in the past. Like that was Doc Brown's whole thing. is you can't change the past because you'll rip a hole in the space-time continuum and destroy the entire universe.
Well, I don't know if that's the rules. That's just like you don't want to do that. Of course they could change the past.
Well, they didn't know that. Doc Brown didn't know that.
I'm talking about the rules of the magic system.
Well, we discovered that as we were watching the thing. Like, all right, so the rules of the magic system ended up being, from our perspective, you could travel back in time, and you did have agency, and you could make changes. But when those changes would butterfly effect and then affect the future as well. So Marty McFly went back to 1955. He had a weird interaction with his mother and his father, which then jeopardizes his existence in the universe. And he hilarity ensues as he tries to put that back together. And then he finds out when he goes back to the present that those subtle changes that he made, that his influence on the past altered his reality, and that his parents were different people. They were much happier. They were a much more functional family. And these things flowed forward. In the next movie, we find out one of the antagonists went back and made a radical change to history and made himself rich beyond all imagining, which I will say is a violation of the rules of the system internal to the movie, but that's fine. Anyway, it created an alternate timeline where everything was terrible, and they had to go back and fix it again. And so Marty ends up going back to the same point in time again, and so we have this time travel layered on top of time travel. And we saw all the same scenes from the first movie again in the second movie from another perspective as he's trying to stop the secondary thing from happening.
Yeah. Okay. I had a slightly different take on this than you.
Oh, okay. What was your
take? To me, the limitations of the magic system are three things. You have to have a flux capacitor. It has to travel 88 miles per hour. And it has to have 1.21 gigawatts, which they always pronounce gigawatts, but there's no such thing as a gigawatt. It's a gigawatt. You have to channel 1.21 gigawatts of electricity into it. So when you have those three things, then you can go to any time in history at the current location you are.
That was the physical rules of the time travel.
Those are the limitations of the magic system. If you cannot meet those three things, you cannot travel through time.
Yeah, we took different takes on it.
Well, the reason those are so important is they kind of drive the plot. You need to be able to travel 88 miles per hour. If you can't travel 88 miles per hour, you can't travel through time. You need to have the flux capacitor. If you don't have the flux capacitor, you can't travel through time. You need to put 1.21 gigawatts of electricity into it. And that is what drove the whole thing about the clock tower and the lightning bolt and all that stuff.
I feel like that was...
the plutonium and the terrorists.
I get that, but I feel like that was a secondary plot to the fact that Marty erased himself from history because he accidentally made his mom fall in love with him.
That's like the consequences of being able to travel through time.
And that's what I was more interested in.
Really, at the surface, Marty accidentally went back in time and then wanted to go back home. That was the central conflict. And then there was all these ancillary things that started coming up that gave it nuance and interest. But really, he just had to meet the limitations of the magic system. They taught us right in the opening scene when they're in the parking lot at the mall. Here are the rules. You need the flux capacitor, you need 1.21 gigawatts, you need 88 miles per hour. You do that, you travel through time. Okay, accidentally did it. Now I need to undo it.
Now, you see, I saw that as a setup for the plot of the first and the second film, where Marty's got to fix his presence in the timeline while also figuring out how to get back. And there's only one opportunity because he has, foreknowledge of the future. The second movie was the antagonist radically altered history using those rules, and then he has to go back and fix it and put it back the way that it was. Now, the third movie, you're right. The entire plot is driven by the fact that they didn't have any gas in the freaking car, and they couldn't get it up to 88 miles an hour, so they had to do the big train heist robbery thing.
Yeah, which was awesome.
The third movie was awesome. It is my favorite of the trilogy.
Me too. Now, in this case, the limitations of the magic system are what make it interesting. It's what drives, the frantic power line from the top of the clock tower to the line across the street, and it's what keeps the plot moving forward. Like, if you have a time machine and it doesn't matter when you go where, then you got all the time in the world. There's nothing that forces the movie to go towards inexorably towards its conclusion. But this, you have to be at this exact spot at this time, just made everything hum. I love it. It's such a good example of good using the limitations of the magic system to drive the storytelling.
Yes, the first movie was the 1.21 gigawatts was the was the limiting factor. Like they were only going to have one opportunity to generate that electricity. It was at this time at the clock tower, so that was the ticking clock the whole movie for Marty to fix his relationship with his parents.
Yeah.
The second movie, we hand-waved all that away because we've got Mr. Fusion now. Everything's fine. We got some old beer cans and banana peels, plenty of power, no problem. The third movie was the freaking 88 miles an hour. So 2 out of 3 of the movies were all about that. You're right.
So when we're only talking about the first movie, the third law of magic, expand on what you already have before you add something new, I think that movie was fine. That was where the second one kind of went off the rails, is they removed the limitation of it being difficult to produce the electricity, and then it became, then it really just, the time travel timelines skewing off got out of control.
Well, that's because that's what the plot was about. The second movie was not about the limitations of the machine itself. The second movie was specifically about the ramifications of what if time travel fell into the wrong hands, Ben?
Yeah. Okay. And it's fine. They were just examining different facets of the same thing, the same can that they'd opened. So do you feel like it's logically consistent?
I think so. I think the Back to the Future movies do an excellent job in maintaining all of Sanderson's laws, minus the, I think, like the second movie, Biff from an alternate future traveled back into the past to give himself that sports almanac. Yeah. So here's my problem: is Marty almost erased his existence by breaking up his parents before they met. How come old Biff still exists in a timeline where young Biff, young Biff didn't become old cantankerous Biff that found the time machine that Doc Brown made?
I don't know.
So at some point we have to presume that rich Biff would find Doc Brown's time machine and then go give it back, give himself the almanac, but he had him committed, so he never had the opportunity. Like, there's so many paradoxes created by old Biff that makes no sense.
Yes. And I think that's the problem when you stray into this space, is that paradoxes ensue. So if we're including the second one, it starts to stumble into logically inconsistent areas. Is it awesome? Yes. It
is.
All time travel movies answer to this trilogy.
I'm going to... Back to the Future 1 and 3, they get a solid A. The second one gets a C because if you start thinking about it too hard, it doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Yeah, I'll also give the first one an A and just constrain my vote there. All right. My first movie that I want to talk about is Terminator 2, Judgment Day. Now, Terminator 1, which came out in like 1984 or something like that, was a time travel movie, but I'm going to talk about the second one.
Everybody likes the second one more than the first one. The first one was also good, but the second one was just much better.
Yeah. So anyone that's not familiar with the conceit of the Terminator movies, we're in the mid-'80s to '90s time period, and some menacing cyborg humanoid comes through a time portal from the future with knowledge about the future and the intent to alter the course of history by changing the past. Now, what's different about this one, but what this would be like if this were Back to the Future, is we start out in the movie in 1955, and we're just going about our business, and then all of a sudden Marty McFly shows up from the future and starts messing up our present.
That's the perspective from this movie.
Yes, that's the innovation of the Terminator movies, is we're in the present, and someone from the future is coming back and trying to interfere with our present to affect their future. The rules of the magic system of the Terminator are kind of unknown. They decide to just hand wave it. At some point in the future, time travel is invented, and for whatever reason, there's a limited capacity to use it. It has a few rules. It can't send anything it wants. It can only send a dude, and for some reason, it can't send his clothes.
They say that specifically in the first movie. The rules were organic material only. And the way that the robots got around that is that they wrapped a T-800 in that living tissue that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right.
So he's the robot skeleton with human stuff on the outside, so they kind of got around it that way. Now, yes. How they got the T-1000 through, they called it living metal, which makes no sense. They just
Oh,
wanted.
wait. I'm not getting to the T-1000 yet. I'm still talking about the time travel thing.
Okay.
So the brilliant twist that James Cameron did when he came out with Terminator 2, which Terminator 1 kind of stood on its own. It could have been the end. But I guess they were looking to exploit a sequel. And so this was in 1991. It was like 8 years later. And it became like, it was the top grossing movie that year. I don't know how old you were in 1991, but this movie was huge. It was so huge, like my freshman year in high school. It was the pinnacle of Arnold Schwarzenegger's career. Anyway, in the first Terminator movie, he comes back and he's this biker dude-looking guy that's just this relentless cyborg robot that's going to kill you. And so the twist in the second movie is it's him again. He looks exactly the same, but this time he's here to help you and not to hurt you. And for the first about 30 minutes of the movie, you don't know that yet, and it looks like he's trying to kill our protagonist.
He's just doing everything that he did in the first movie.
Yeah. Now, the time travel system, okay, so we can only send back like one organic human being, not even his clothes. He comes back, and he's trying to alter the future by basically, in this case, killing a person. I think this is kind of a proxy for the thought exercise people often do that, like, if you could go back in time and prevent Hitler from being born, would you do it?
I mean, the answer is obviously yes. The problem is that can't be possible, because if you did, then you would erase the future where you exist and wanted to kill Hitler.
Yeah, and that's exactly where the Terminator universe kind of comes undone, is paradoxes galore.
Well, we say that, but at the same time, it's all consistent in the film franchise, because they don't make... What ends up happening is the machines are trying to execute who is going to be the leader of the resistance, but they can't, and they don't, and they're constantly failing at it. And so what looks like a failed attempt to alter the timeline could just be the timeline unfolding as it was supposed to in the first place.
Yeah. Okay, so you're saying that's what helps maintain the logical consistency. The problem is it creates these fixed loops that otherwise that are ex nihilo. In Terminator 2, one of the main conceits is that there's a scientist that apparently invents the technology that leads to a lot of these things, the invention of AI and the self-aware cyborgs that go around trying to kill people and that kind of thing. But then over the course of the film, it turns out that the things that he was able to use to get the technological innovations are the stuff that came back from the future. And it creates this weird closed loop.
There's an excellent comic series that talks about that exact kind of time travel closed loop, which is outstanding. And I love these closed loops because they're consistent within their own tiny universe. It's like A caused B, which caused A. And as long as you don't interrupt that cycle, it's fine. It'll continue forever.
But that's what they're trying to do, is to interrupt the cycle. So, in the climax of the film, they're trying to destroy not only the Terminator that came back to kill the boy John, but also the one that came back to protect him, because as long as he still exists, his technology can be mined and become the technology that becomes Skynet, that launches all the nuclear missiles and creates Judgment Day and kills everyone on Earth. Or
right.
a lot of people.
Most people.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a story about Terminator 2, but it's a complete tangent. Are you okay with me? Okay.
Before you take that tangent, I want to mention, this made me think of Star Trek 4, which they do it just kind of tongue-in-cheek. If you remember, that was the one where like the space probe comes to Earth, and it's like destroying Earth because it's trying to talk to, it turns out to be humpback whales.
Was that? Oh, yes, and they had to take the Klingon bird of prey and whip it around
and go
the
back
sun.
in time by going warp 9 around the sun. Okay, so they go back in time and they get there, and it turns out that in order to get the humpback whales back to the future, they need to build up a fish tank inside of the bird of prey, but they can't because they don't have transparent aluminum. And so Scotty's
they don't have an actual material thick enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so Scotty's just like, well, I'll just give him the formula for transparent aluminum. And they're like, well, won't that alter the future? And he goes, how do we know this isn't how they get it in the first place? Which is the closed loop thing you were talking about.
Yeah.
And like, okay, give it to him. And they all just kind of shrug it off, and we don't spend a lot of time dwelling on all the time travel paradoxes. But yeah, that was a good moment. All right, let's hear your tangent.
All right, my first interaction with Terminator 2 was I was very young. I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and I remember my parents took us to a party that one of our neighbors was throwing. And this was one of those standard adult parties where like all the adults are having fun, and then there are children present, but they're trying to ignore the children to the max extent possible because that's not what the party is about.
Yeah.
I remember at one point I must have been particularly annoying because my dad said, "Do you want to go watch a movie?" Because at the time we had a van that had like one of those little TV VCR combos in it.
Okay.
I was like, "Yeah, I want to watch a movie." So I was out in the van by myself at night as like a 10 or 11-year-old. And he puts in Terminator 2
on VHS.
On VHS. And Ben, I don't know if you remember the opening scene.
Yeah, there's this scene where he's chasing them in a van just like that.
Well, the opening scene, all right, I didn't get past the first 5 minutes. Because the opening scene of that movie is the Terminators with no skin, just the skeleton cyborgs, like in a firefight with the humans. And like the opening scene is a skull and it being crushed by a robot foot, and it pans up to what is obviously a horrifying visage for a 10-year-old at night in a van in the desert by himself. And awesome. I could not make it through, and I just went back inside like, that's like, I don't know how I conveyed it, but like I like to think that I said that. I was like,
on your son, like, who's also that age.
Father, that movie is far too terrifying for a small child to watch by himself.
Leave me alone. I'm trying to drink in peace. I don't want to pretend kids don't exist. like everybody loves Raymond.
Yeah, exactly. That was my first introduction to Terminator 2. I now love the movie, but I'm a grown man, so I can handle it.
Yeah, all right. So does it follow the rules? Does it teach us the rules of time travel? Time travel just kind of exists to set up the conflict in this case. The conflict of being chased by a killer cyborg and having lots of stunts and awesome stuff.
This is another one of those things where the Sandersonian laws are kind of tangential because the main plot is only facilitated and not directly related to the magic system in this case.
That's interesting that how different that is from Back to the Future, where in Back to the Future it's like front and center, but in this one it's just not.
Well, it's just like a hand-wavy thing. Like you said, we don't know a lot about it. There's a couple of rules that are very ill-defined. Basically, it's a premise.
There's killer robots here from the future that far exceed modern technology, but they're trying to kill us.
Exactly. That is the entire. That's the whole purpose of time travel to exist, is to have these specific plot devices exist in the present.
Well, there's definitely a little bit of the limitations are more interesting than its capabilities. And expand on what you already have before you add something new. Definitely Law Zero. Always err on the side of that which is awesome. I mean, this movie was the epitome of that. I mean, there's so many set piece things where, like, he's standing on the 4th floor of the building and shooting all the police cars with the Gatling gun. They blow up the entire building. There's the semi chase. I mean, that movie was just filled with just awesomeness.
I also think they did a great job of building on what they had before you add something new. Because if you hadn't seen the first movie, why is Sarah Connor like a super jacked woman in a mental institution? Like, they barely touch on that. But the fact, like, she had that entire first movie happen to her and then dedicated her life to making sure her son was a trained warrior, that all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it kind of fulfills what you were saying about the closed loop of the future. The fact that the father of her child was a man from the future. Yeah,
that's a whole other thing we're not going to talk about.
Yeah, okay, so if we're talking about the logical inconsistencies, there's a lot to be had here if you want to peel back the surface. But it's definitely awesome. I'm going to give it a B, I guess, for its ability to follow the rules that it's set up. I'm there. It should be like a C or a D because the paradoxes like you were talking about earlier. But Rule Zero, man, the whole movie is just awesome start to finish, so that brings it back up to a B. All right, what was your second one?
Okay, so my second one, I'm really glad that you talked about Terminator because this brings into one of my other ones. This is not a movie. This is a TV show. This is called Rick and Morty. Have you ever seen this show, Ben?
I'm aware of it.
Okay, this is an animated show on Cartoon Network. The premise is actually hilarious because it's based loosely on Back to the Future. You have
it's not called Doc and Marty?
No. So it's an old guy who is a genius and his grandson in the show.
Old guy with wiry white hair?
Yes, it is. Like the creators of the show have come out and said that it's based loosely on this inexplicable relationship between Doc Brown and Marty McFly. And it's Rick, who's the grandfather of Morty. And they go on adventures. Rick is the smartest person in the universe and can time travel and travel to alternate dimensions and can make anything and is just so over it. Like, I don't know. He's very nihilistic. Yeah. And I find it hilarious.
He's
Anyway,
not suicidal, but he's definitely just bored with being the smartest person in the universe.
he attempts to commit suicide a couple times. One time he was very close, but he was too drunk to pull it off. Like, it's pretty bad. Definitely an adult show. Do not let your kids watch it. It is animated, but don't let that fool you. Anyway, there's 2 episodes where they do time travel. I'm going to talk about one that is directly related to Terminator 2, and it's hilarious. The scene is they are flying through space in their space car that he made out of trash. Like, there's little trash cans as part of the car. And then the whole spaceship starts rattling. He's like, oh, crap, I got a flat tire. And then Morty goes, how do you get a flat tire in space? It's like, it's space. Everything's in space. Anything can happen. So anyway, he goes out and they're fixing the tire in space, and a snake in a spacesuit comes up and bites Morty. And this whole premise is that they end up taking the snake back to a snake planet. There's a whole planet of snakes this was like their first pioneer. This was their Neil Armstrong that the snake species sent into space, right?
Then why did it bite them?
Because it's a snake, Ben.
That's how snakes say hello. Hello.
It's the frog and the scorpion thing. Because it's a snake, so it bit him. Anyway, they take it back to the planet and just like kind of huck it out the window and like let the little parachute catch it on the way down or whatever. But Morty says that's not good enough. And so he went and he bought a snake from Earth that looked like the snake. And he put it in like a spacesuit that was kind of like that spacesuit, and then flew back out to the planet and threw that snake down. Like, oh, we can't have killed their snake Buzz Aldrin or whoever.
Okay, which is kind of a play on like the thing that grown-ups might do if their child's pet dies and they go buy one that looks like it and give it to them instead of telling them that it actually died.
Right. Well, so here's the thing. The snake lands, and it's this great scene because all of it is in snake language. None of it is subtitled, but you can kind of tell what's going on based on what the deal is. They very quickly figure out that this is an alien snake from another planet, which then alters, like, it unifies all of their societies, and they all start working towards, like, there is a bigger threat out there than our tribalistic snake nonsense. And then Morty is in his room, and then a portal opens, and then, like, a snake drops out and tries to kill him. And while he's fighting it, another portal opens, and a little robot snake comes out and kills the snake that's trying to assassinate him, and starts talking to him like, you are the one that altered our society and made it better, and we're here to protect you. And it's this whole Terminator 2 thing. Like, they're trying, some faction's trying to kill Morty for making this happen, and another faction's trying to protect Morty. This is the part that I love to death about this, because it's far more realistic if time travel exists, and you can send people back to alter the future. What ends up happening is tens of thousands of portals throughout this show are opening, and snakes and robot snakes are just dropping constantly, every like half second in different parts, and they're all just slaughtering each other, trying to protect and or kill Morty, who is in the vicinity.
It's just the idea drawn to its ridiculous conclusion.
Yes, that given infinite time, there would be infinite attempts on Morty's life, and they would all come constantly forever.
Right. Now, this is a good thing I like when it's done right, where there's this, where basically in something as short as a 22-minute cartoon on Cartoon Network, Adult Swim, where you don't have time to tell the whole time travel magic system of the Terminator universe, but you can draw on the fact that it's generally part of the zeitgeist, and then just let people fill in the blanks with their knowledge that they bring with them from elsewhere to enjoy the plot of this loony zaniness.
And that is exactly what they did. And it was a direct callback to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And they took it to its ridiculous logical conclusion, which I loved and was fantastic.
So the writer sat down and said, was Terminator 2 logically consistent? No, it wasn't. If it was, this is what would happen. Let's do that.
The resolution of this episode, and like, how are they going to tie this up in a 22-minute episode like you're talking about? How are they going to solve the time travel paradox problem? Well, there's another episode that introduces this race of characters that exist outside of the fourth dimension, and their whole deal is trying to maintain the integrity of the timeline. And so at one point they're even talking like, how are we going to fix this? And then Rick says, oh, we're not. We're just like, they're going 88 miles an hour down the freeway. We're just going to wait for them to blow past a cop. And then it jump cuts. And it jump cuts to this race of time cops, essentially. And they're like, what is this? Snakes? Freaking snakes? Oh, I don't think so. And like two of them travel back to like this point in time. You see a snake with a club dragging another snake into a cave, and these two guys roll up and they're like, "Oh, you're some kind of smart snake using tools, huh? I don't think so." And they just start beating the crap out of him. And then all the snakes in the present just disappear.
Nice. Well done. So they use the same logic to deal with the problem. They just go back farther.
Yep, basically.
All right. Well, I suppose if the snakes had gone back and tried to end the human race, that might have solved the problem better than going after Morty.
It was a hilarious episode. I believe it was. I wrote it down. Here it is. It's season 4, episode 5, Rattlestar Rick Lactica. If you haven't seen it, it's on Hulu. I recommend it.
So they introduced the idea of the snakes and the time travel thing like 2 seasons before?
They introduced the idea of the time cops 2 seasons before. In season 2, episode 1, A Wrinkle in Time. The season finale for season 1 is they destroyed the house with this ridiculous house party. So then Rick froze time to give them time to clean up the place. And like, oh yeah, we'll take a couple hours to clean up the house, no big deal. They ended up freezing time for like 6 months or something. So it was like the 3 main characters and everyone else was just frozen in time, which then screwed up their place in time somehow. And so then like the whole episode is about their, it was really interesting. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend watching it because the idea that if you make different choices, it would split the timeline. You've heard of that concept. Where
I mean, we talked about it on this podcast with that Community episode.
Yes, exactly. What happens is that because they were frozen in time for so long, they become quantumly unstable.
I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. I can't remember off the top of my head which episode it was.
Of the podcast, not the Rick and Morty
episode
show.
28.
Anyway, so 2 of the characters get in like an argument, but then it plays out in 2 different ways, and then they end up splitting their own timeline into 2. And the way they portray it is they visibly split the screen into 2 screens where they're showing exactly the same shot, but they're slightly and subtly different based on the differences between what would have happened with the argument with the kids or whatever. And so then all these 3 characters were split between multiple quantum time states for the entire episode, and it gets split up into 4 and then 8 later. And it is really interesting to watch, and that's when they introduced the whole time cops thing.
Dude, you give me a flashback of this other thing. This is a big tangent, but my church released this I'll just call it a propaganda video about good moral living, where there's a man and he's in his office and you can tell he kind of finishes work for the day, and then he kind of gets this funny look on his face and he turns around behind him and he closes the door, and then you're looking at the back of his laptop, so you can't see what he's seeing on the screen, but it's obviously he decided it's time to look at porn.
Okay.
And the screen splits, and you can see there's another one where he instead closes his laptop and goes out and spends time with his family, and then it kind of goes forward into the future where he ends up divorced and his wife hates him and his children don't love him and stuff like that, or the other guy who lives a happy life.
Oh, like porn is heroin? Not even once.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of movies that are filmed that way. Kind of that same concept where how different decisions would affect and they show it in real time. So they did that for this episode and introduced the time cops, which then solved the problem with the snakes.
Yeah. So I don't know how to evaluate A Wrinkle in Time and Rattlestar Rick Lactica here with this with the magic system. They're drawing on the knowledge in the universe of Terminator 2. So did they fix the logical consistencies? Did they get an upgrade from the B grade we gave Terminator 2?
Well, this is the thing, is they took those logical inconsistencies and they brought them front and center. And basically, the humor of the episode was just like, this is
pointing them out.
Yeah, it's like, look at how stupid this whole concept of time travel to murder somebody it actually is, if you were to think about it for 10 seconds.
But that creates its own new conflict. Did they resolve it with the rules they gave you? Is it interesting?
I honestly think they did solve it with the rules they gave us based on if you'd seen season 2, episode 1, because the same person that resolved the first problem that they had with time showed up and solved the second problem that they had with time.
Huh. Okay. All right, so what grade are you giving it? Because I haven't watched it, so I can't grade it.
Oh, I give it an A, and I recommend you go watch it because it's hilarious.
I don't know. I don't have like a Cartoon Network pass or whatever.
Hulu. I said it's on Hulu.
Oh, Hulu. I don't have Hulu. Okay. My second time travel movie is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Now,
Excellent.
this is excellent. This is a play on the time travel subgenre that is anything goes. This came out in like 89, so I think there was two of the three, maybe all three of the Back to the Future movies were out, and the market was starting to get saturated, and they're like, you know what? We can just draw on the idea of time travel to create a bunch of funness and not really have to deal with all the logical inconsistencies in setting up a good system. Loosely, there are the circuits of time that exist. Bill and Ted find out because apparently at some point in the future, their band, Wild Stallions, creates a utopian society where everyone lives in peace. But for some reason that they don't explain and don't even try to be, that this moment they're coming up on where they have to pass high school history and Ted not get sent off to military school in Alaska, they have to pass this history exam, and they haven't been taking it serious. So Rufus shows up in the phone booth, which represents their interface with the circuits of time, which allow them to go to any time and place in the past using the phone booth. The rule, as we're taught following Sanderson's law, is that the clock in their reality they come from is always ticking, and they can only go back to that present, and they have the deadline to meet in that present. And that keeps the plot moving forward and helps move things along. Now, there is no thought or talk whatsoever of like things they do in the past affecting the present.
Yeah, none whatsoever. Like, paradoxes don't exist in the Bill and Ted universe.
Except for later, and this is where I think they break the third law, expand on what you have before you add something new. They're at the police station, they're trying to get their time travel buddies out of jail, and they need to, but they don't have what they need, and they're running out of time. So then they do this verbal thing where they're like, well, in the future, I'm going to use the time travel phone booth to go back in the past and steal my dad's keys and leave them behind this sign. And like, oh, here they are.
Well, and this is the thing, though, because the dad had been complaining that he lost his keys the whole movie.
It's the closed loop again.
Yes, exactly. It was. I agree that it's a serious cop out, especially because they didn't use it just to get the keys, which we could have given them a pass.
Yeah, they also used it to make the the garbage can fall out of the top of the set.
They did so many things. They had a tape recorder, like distraction of themselves.
Yeah, the tape recorder. That's right.
They created
once
a booby trap.
Introduced this idea into their universe, and they use it too much.
Way too much. So yeah,
okay.
It did fall apart at that point.
So that was them violating the third rule. I don't know if it wouldn't have been if they were just erring on this side of that, which is awesome because it is kind of funny that they they had the keys and the garbage can fell down and it said Wild Stallions rule on it, and like the thing that he said on the tape recorder was kind of silly and stuff like that. But I picked this one because I really enjoyed it at how they use the time travel meme as just to introduce magic into the environment. These are a couple of slackers from high school in California, and all of a sudden they're meeting Socrates and Billy the Kid, and we have Beethoven listening to Van Halen. Like that in and of itself is a really awesome concept, but how would you get it without time travel?
I can't get past this point. I'm hoping you mispronounce Socrates on purpose.
Socrates.
Yeah, and it was fun seeing Genghis Khan like tear up a hockey rink. That's undeniably awesome. And like you said, this all goes back to Rule Zero. Was any of this make sense? Not really. The logical consistency isn't there. They're introducing new stuff constantly, but it was all pretty cool. Joan of Arc doing an aerobics class in a mall in the 80s is just plain fun.
Yeah, it was almost like they just sat around and thought of like all the awesome stuff they could and then just crammed it all into one movie. Where does Napoleon go when he gets lost? Waterloo, of course.
So I will say the most unbelievable portion of that entire movie, like the time travel, the historical figures, and all of the problems that they had, the most unrealistic aspect of the whole thing is that they're going to cram every high school student, presumably, into an auditorium all
make
day.
Them listen to each other's history reports.
Yeah, all day, back to back. Are you insane? That place would have been burned down. Like there would have been riots.
Yeah, and that scene at the end is one of my favorite cinematic payoffs in all of movies. The history report. It's just great. it's such a satisfying payoff that's so fun to watch.
Well, all I can think about is the overachieving A student that they never show in the movie, that probably doesn't exist, but that is immediately in the principal's office the next day. Like, those two slackers had their parents hire paid actors to do their history report for them, and they got a better grade than me, who busted my butt? I don't think so. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, you're making me think of a scene from Clueless where Cher's supposed to be debating Amber, and she's like, Mr. Hall, we're supposed to be talking about current events, and she's talking about some party. If she doesn't do her assignment, I can't do mine.
But that's exactly it. That's what would have happened.
Yeah.
Socrates, Plato. They had paid actors on stage. How did they get an A? They didn't learn anything.
So Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure suffered from some of the same problems as the Terminator franchise and the Back to the Future franchise, that when they started to examine some of the other aspects of time travel, the logical inconsistencies started to pile up and it all started to fall apart. The second and third movies in the Bill and Ted franchise aren't that great. The third one just came out last year. Have you seen it?
I have not seen the third one.
Okay, I've seen it.
I will
can't
see
recommend
it, but I haven't seen it yet.
The second one was a nightmare, although it had its moments. You have to see it to see the third one. Well, you won't get the third one if you haven't seen the second one.
That's the idea of you can get out of hell if you beat death at Battleship.
At checkers, yeah. Or there's that scene where they're like falling for 20 minutes. They're like, ah.
Yes, that scene's awesome when they start talking to each other and just like
dude,
BSing.
This hole is really deep.
Yes, that movie is terrible, but it does have its moments.
Yeah. Okay. So as far as like if following the laws, I mean, they really play on the zeroth law here. That they understand that what they're doing is just nonsense. They try to give it a few rules to limit it. Like they do stick to the rule of having to go by the clock in San Dimas where they came from. But really, anytime anything looks like it's going to be wrong, they just err on the side of that, which is awesome. So I'm going to give it an A. I think it was a good use of time travel and storytelling following the laws.
Oh, you are showing your bias, sir. I'm going to give this...
I'm definitely biased.
I'm going to give this movie the grade that they should have gotten in their history report at best, and that's a C-.
Awesome. Okay, I love when we disagree. All right, what's your third?
My third one is another TV show. I don't know why. I figured there's only a handful of movies, but there's a lot of great TV shows. So
there's a ton of movies.
Oh, well, fair. I'm reaching deep on this one, though. Star Trek Voyager, Season 4, Episodes 8 and 9. Collectively, they were called The Year of Hell. Ben, have you ever watched Star Trek Voyager?
Nope.
Oh.
I'm a bit of a Trekkie, but I don't have patience for all the episodes of the TV shows because they tend to be kind of spotty.
Yeah, Voyager is really hit or miss. Next Generation is probably my preferred one, but Voyager.
Yeah, but even then, Next Generation, about every sixth one is an absolute clunker.
Which happens. It's a TV show.
Yeah.
You got to take the good with the bad. Star Trek Voyager has a lot of problems with the writing, but we're not going to talk about that. What we're going to talk about is this concept that they had in The Year of Hell. And in these 2 episodes, they traveled to this region of space that is weird for a lot of different reasons. Specifically, there is one giant, like, capital star cruiser ship that is flying around from place to place and firing this weapon at very strategic targets. And this weapon that they are firing takes the target and erases them from all of history. So whether that target is like an asteroid or a town, or in one case they erased an entire planet from all of, like...
Why would you want to erase an asteroid from all of history?
So here's the thing, is this...
Like the one that extincts the dinosaurs on Earth?
This whole thing was created by a guy he was a military scientist, and he was trying to create a weapon to end some big civil war or whatever. What ended up happening, though, was that he spent his entire life devoted to creating this thing, and his wife got some terrible disease and died. And so he is now Captain Ahab, trying to find a way to make it so that disease...
Go back and kill the bat that gave that disease to humanity.
Exactly. And so his wife his wife would be alive today. And there's... Not only does he have the ship that can erase time...
That plot device is overused.
What, the missing spouse?
Yes. I was thinking of Eric Bana's character in the Star Trek reboot, but yeah.
I mean, is there any more powerful motivator for...
That's a time travel movie too.
You're derailing me. Are you listening to my Star Trek Voyager discussion?
Yeah. Sorry. Okay, so his wife died. That's his motivation.
Okay.
How's the time travel magic system work?
So there's two things. One, he's got the weapon. Whatever he fires at, and it's very surgical in its precision about what he wants specifically deleted from time. It is deleted from all time, period. There is no, I only want to delete it back to such and such a year. No, it is just gone as if it had never existed in the first place, okay?
Like Thanos snapping.
Yes, exactly. Forever. And it alters the past, which then alters the present. So the second thing is that they have some kind of ultra-powerful computer on their capital ship that can calculate and simulate what would happen if they fired it at specific targets. So our protagonist in this ends up
So it's like a gun. You just pointed at something, and then it alters all of past and future.
It's a phaser weapon. It's like a laser, but yeah.
Okay, I want to dwell on the awesomeness of that concept for a second. Because, on Star Trek, you have your phaser, and you turn the dial on it, and there's, the maximum setting where it will, vaporize or disintegrate something, and there's, the minimum setting where it will stun something. And I'm imagining, a Rick and Morty, where you can see the dial turns all the way around, and then there's a setting way past the highest setting that's, erased from existence for eternity. And you turn it to that and point it at something, and...
That's exactly what happened. So
okay.
Half of the plot of the episode is the poor Voyager, the starship that is stuck in this chunk of space as time is altering around them. And it's just bad. It's called the Year of Hell for a reason. It takes the events of these two episodes play out over the course of one standard year. And it's terrible for them. But we don't care about them because they don't have anything to do with the time travel mechanic. We care about is one of our protagonists ends up on this capital ship somehow with the guy and ends up befriending the captain of the ship, and they start both getting really into it because then the guy, he's Captain Ahab trying to get his wife back. Then the protagonist is all about, well, is there something that I can do to alter history so that my crew and my people never end up in this part of space or marooned here or whatever in the first place? And so he goes down his own Ahab rabbit hole. And there's this great scene where he's talking about it, where he goes up to his guy with his first one. He's like, I think that if I delete this meteorite from history, we never, none of this bad stuff would have happened to me and my crew. And then the captain in his smug way goes, okay, we'll run the simulation. Let's see what happens. And he's like, I think it's going to do this. And you see one little bar in the way of simplification for the TV show. They have a couple of line charts that are stacked on top of each other. He's like, I think this line's going to go here and this line's going to go here. And he goes, and he runs a simulation, and then everything radically changes. And he's like, what happened? And the captain goes, the law of unintended consequences. That asteroid 2.4 billion years ago went around this planet, which pulled this cloud out of space, which created this amount of life, which then you just deleted an entire civilization from history. And that's kind of the conceit of the whole thing, is...
Why does that appeal to you, Josh? Why did you remember that? Why did you pick this as your example of time travel?
It's that whole unintended consequences butterfly effect combined with the Captain Ahab obsession with it. Because I can see myself falling into that trap so easily. I'm a smart guy. I created this technology. There is no way I can't find a way to use it to solve this specific problem, and then just falling so deep down that rabbit hole that you completely lose yourself to it.
Yeah, well, the Butterfly Effect movie was just like that. There was this one girl that he wanted to live, and he found out that he had the, psychokinetic power to go back in the past, and every time he would go back and try to change a thing to prevent her from dying, he would just make it worse, and she would end up dying later or a different way or something like that. Not like Final Destination style, but just he can't understand all of the unintended consequences of his actions changing the past, and it still doesn't achieve the outcome he wanted.
Yeah. So that concept, that idea, that here are the rules and limitations, but they were so big and so complicated that they couldn't be overcome. I think that's what really appealed to me about this idea. At the end of the episode, what ended up happening...
I feel that way about so many things. So go ahead about the end.
The climax is perfect. It's just this sprinkle of deliciousness at the end.
No, this is so much it got stretched across 2 episodes, right?
Yes, and this was a 40-minute TV show, so this was a lot of screen time dedicated to this concept.
Okay.
The conclusion, the climax, is that our protagonist turns the weapon on itself and makes the whole capital ship implode, basically, and erase its own existence from all of history.
Huh.
And then what we get is then a flashback to the beginning of the first episode where the Voyager was going into this terrible space, but everything's different now because this war was resolved years and years and years ago. Nobody's been screwing with time in this part of space forever. And like they just kind of fly by it like they're friendly neighbors.
And they never know.
No, and they never know. And then they also show our antagonist, the guy who created the technology in the first place, like in his apartment trying to like doing some math or something on a notebook, and his wife comes in. He's like, "Hey, stop working, let's go hang out." And he's like, "Okay." And he puts his pen down and gets up and walks off, and it pans down and it shows the start of a sketch of the capital ship that he was going to create, but never did because it was erased from history.
Man, I love those kinds of ideas. So we talked last week about Minority Report was based on a Philip K. Dick novel, and there's another short story based on a Philip K. Dick short story that I didn't mention called The Adjustment Bureau. Have you seen that one?
I love the Adjustment Bureau movie. That
Me
movie
too.
is great.
And it has that exact same kind of idea where there's this shadowy organization that's shaping the future by making subtle adjustments to people's lives now. And the central idea behind Matt Damon's story was that he was going to be destined to be this prolific, influential politician, but it required him to have a painful existence. And if he ever met this one girl and got together with her, he would be too content and no longer have the drive to succeed in the cutthroat world of politics, so they had to keep her away from him.
Yeah. The whole movie, that was a cool concept for a movie, and it was well done. And I just like people in trilby hats anyway.
Yeah. All right. You've actually convinced me. I think I'm going to go find that one. Star Trek Voyager Season 4, Episodes 8 and 9. Will it be okay if I just dive in at Episode 8? Do I need to know the characters a whole lot?
Probably not really. I would read a Wikipedia article trying to figure out what the setup, what the whole problem with Voyager is and why the things are set up the way they are. But you're probably fine watching it without that.
All right. So again, I haven't seen it, so I can't rate it. How do you rate it as far as its ability to understand the rules of the magic system, and is it logically consistent, and do they resolve it using the system they set up?
Be warned, dear listeners. It's a Star Trek show, so it's way nerdy. Like, it's way more talking and a lot less action. But for me, that's very awesome. So I think it's very consistent with the rules that it sets up. It is very interesting consequences and ramifications of the actions that are being taken place by the people that are doing the time stuff. I give it an A, but I might be biased towards Star Trek. So
nice. No, you convinced me. I think I'm gonna try that one. All right. Before I go on to the final one that I have, and we wrap it up, I want to do a speed round because you said there weren't that many movies. So just in the movie Avengers Endgame alone, where they're becoming yet another movie in the pantheon of sci-fi time travel movies, they have this scene where they do a speed round and list off a bunch of time travel movies. So we'll see how many we did. Back to the Future, Star Trek 4, Terminator, Time Cop, Time After Time. I don't think that's even a movie. That's just a song, but they were throwing that in for comedic effect. Quantum Leap, Wrinkle in Time, Somewhere in Time, Hot Tub Time Machine, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Die Hard. No, that's not one.
That's a funny one.
In the Minute Physics video, they also bring up Looper,
I
which
saw
I've
Looper.
seen.
That movie is terrible.
Lost, the television series, which I haven't. Game of Thrones. How is that a time travel?
There's time travel in Game of Thrones.
Doctor Who, definitely. Men in Black 3 was kind of all about it. It was definitely a time travel paradoxy, science-y movie.
No, that was a heartless cash grab. Don't go watch that.
Yeah, and then there's a few historical ones. Like you brought up the example of just being able to see your past and try and change it, or what it would be like if you're erased from existence. That made me think of the Christmas classic "It's a Wonderful Life," or even the Georgian era, or whatever era it is, Charles Dickensian Christmas Carol, which is an example of do-over time travel.
Kind of. Like, he just gets a vision of the future. Like, he could have been high on that bad oatmeal that he was eating before he went to bed. We talked about that in our Christmas special.
But like, what would it be like if I didn't exist at all?
Also true.
Yeah. And that, which leads me to my favorite film of all time, which happens to be a time travel movie, which is Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day is an excellent movie, and you have said multiple times it is your favorite movie.
Now, it's really different from all of these others in that when it comes to understanding the rules of the magic system, how it got there, why it exists, what the rules of it are, we don't know any of that. We never know.
I always took it as a capricious deity trying to make our protagonist a better person, because he doesn't ever escape it until he becomes the perfect version of himself.
But there's no evidence for that in the film itself.
No, that's true. None whatsoever. It is open to interpretation, which is a genius move on the movie maker's part, and we've talked about that before too.
Yes. I also like the fact that, kind of like WandaVision, it's just a mystery that we're unraveling along with the protagonist, but we don't understand it. Like in Back to the Future, right up front, they tell you the rules. Here's the rules. Got to have flux capacitor, drive 88 miles per hour, 1.21 gigawatts. All right, got it. We know all the rules right up front. In Groundhog Day, like, we're just as mystified as Phil Connors when all of a sudden he wakes up and it's February 2nd again, 6 a.m., Sonny and Cher playing on the radio.
And that's where the appeal of the movie comes from, and that's where the intrigue and the engagement comes for the audience. I still want to maintain that while Groundhog Day is a fantastic movie, I also very much appreciate Palm Springs, which did exactly the same thing, but then like took the extra couple of logical steps that I wanted to see in Groundhog Day. Like, how do you exploit this knowledge of the future to your own benefit? Or what happens when you've relived this life 1,000 times and just give up? You know what? I'm done.
Now, contained inside of this Palm Springs Groundhog Day is a theological concept that I hold near to my heart, and that is, if we have an immortal soul inside of us and we're here on Earth experiencing human existence and we die someday, what do we get to take with us? You know, you don't take anything with you except what you know and what you've learned that's become part of your spiritual identity. So that's how it works. You know, no matter how many objects he collected one day, when he goes to sleep that day, he wakes up again and he starts back over with only what he had at the beginning of the day on February 2nd. So the only thing he brings with him on each iteration of this do-over time travel loop is his knowledge of the world around him.
Interesting. Which then calls into question the theoretical storage limits of the human mind. Like, how long could he live in this time loop before going absolutely mad or forgetting where he lived before he was in this town?
Yeah. Now, once he kind of goes through the 4 stages of grief and reaches the acceptance phase, then he uses that knowledge to better himself. And he becomes knowledgeable about the people around him and uses that knowledge to help them. He develops the skill of playing the piano. He learns to carve ice sculptures. He becomes a bit of an amateur medical technician, auto mechanic, all kinds of, learns to toss cards in a hat from across the room, just all kinds of great things that will retain with you when you reset the day. Now, he wasn't doing any of that with the expectation of exploiting this time travel magic system. He didn't know, there was no understanding of the rules. There was no rules.
Well, by the time you get to the acceptance stage, after committing multiple suicides and not escaping from it, you would assume that this is some form of weird purgatory and you're just stuck here. And so he'd have to come to the conclusion that it is what he makes it.
And that's kind of where we come in Palm Springs, where he's just kind of like riding it out. But then when he gets the woman caught in the loop with him as well, she helps him realize that he was kind of stuck at a low level. Like he wasn't really improving himself.
Oh no, it was a very nihilistic view of this situation. Like he had gotten to the point where he accepted that this was his life, but
not nihilistic like the other guy that tried to kill him all the time, but nihilistic like the Big Lebowski. Just
very shrug,
whatever.
Like, man, whatever, man. I'm just gonna live another day.
Yeah, no matter what.
Yeah.
I think that was also one of the weaknesses of Palm Springs, except that they had to have it in that they needed a bit more understanding of why the time loop existed so that it could be exploited.
Yeah, because the ultimate conclusion of that was that they escaped from it eventually, which, I mean, they could have left it without that. We could have left our protagonist couple like happily together, stuck in a time loop for all eternity. I think that would have been an equally justifiable ending to the movie.
So, to show that I'm not as biased as you say that I am, I'm going to give the Groundhog Day a low grade here in their use of the magic system, because they don't really teach us the rules and we don't understand them and we don't follow them. So I'm going to give it a D for its use of the magic system.
Really? That is interesting.
Yeah.
Just because...
My favorite film of all time. It does not follow Sanderson's laws of magic.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. Solving the conflict that he's stuck in this time loop depends directly on how much we understand it, which we don't at all. The limitations are more interesting than his capabilities, which we kind of get because we understand that he's just stuck there, but we don't know anything else beyond that. And then expand on what you have before you add something new. He does escape it inexplicably at the end after he gets the girl. That's kind of arbitrary. So, yeah, I guess it doesn't follow any of these rules. But it's your favorite movie, Ben. Come on.
Yeah. Which just goes to show you don't have to be consistent with these kinds of things in order to tell a good story.
I don't know. I'm going to give it a higher grade than that just because it is such a well-told story. And
all right, so what do you give it?
I am going to give it probably a C because it does break all of these rules. But as far as the actual magic in the system. But Rule 0 brings it back up to where it should be. Bill Murray does an excellent job of convincing us that a terrible person, given enough time and motivation and nothing else to do, can become a good person.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, I'm going to do like I usually do, and I'm going to make an infographic that puts our 6 films together all in one panel with our ratings of their use of the magic system in time travel. So if you want to see that, you can go to our social media page. I usually put up a photo album with every episode on the Bad at Magic Facebook page. If you haven't liked it, please do follow it, and you can see I usually share memes throughout the week that are relative to things we talked about on the podcast, and where this past week we had several of our audience members interact with us. For instance, I made we incorrectly named an actor from the movie Minority Report last week. One of our audience members corrected us on Facebook, and I created a new infographic showing the difference between Will Ferrell and Colin Farrell and Colin Firth and Will Firth. Did you see my infographic?
I did see the infographic. I didn't know Will Firth was a person. And I had to Google it because the image that you have on that infographic, he looks like some kind of anime vampire. And I didn't think that was a real person.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a real person.
Will Firth, everyone. Real person. Not somebody we talked about, but definitely on the Facebook page.
Yeah. Now, next time, you've kind of been asking me to talk about something, so I'm going to talk about it, and we'll delve into some parenting ideas. And I want to talk about the rich family behavior modification plan that we used over the years. I don't know if I've ever given you the full rundown on it, so we'll do that next time.
I do need a more systematic approach to modifying the behavior of my children because, Ben, is it like this for every parent? Because I'm just flying by the seat of my pants here.
We all are, Josh.
Well, that's good to know because, I don't know, it just feels hard sometimes.
Yeah. Well, if you want someone to commiserate with, you can go on the Reddit, our subreddit, Reddit/r/Bad at Magic, and you can join in the discussion, or you can go on our Facebook page.
If you like what we do and you like what we talk about, please consider sharing us with a friend. If you really want to support the show, one of the easiest things that you can do is give us a 5-star rating on your podcast player of your choice. I keep saying this, but you would be shocked at the amount of visibility we get from that. And if
really helps.
If you are obsessed with us and you just want to hear Ben's sweet, silky voice speak to you for all of time, the best thing you can do is become one of our patrons on Patreon. And we also give bonus content to those individuals and free giveaways from time to time.
And next time we will delve into how to do your best at being a parent. And till then, enjoy living the Muggle life.